Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me all right without the microphone. We've got quite an echo up here, so I think this is a bit better. My name is Caroline Brahm. I'm the Dean of the School of Law here at Anglo-American University, and it's my great pleasure to welcome everybody here to AAU, including our wonderful panel that we have, who I will introduce in just a moment. So we are so pleased to see so many people who are interested in this, because this is something that here at AAU and with the Institute for International Relations, we all care very deeply about. So I think that you are in for a wonderful discussion this afternoon. So today's talk is in cooperation with Anglo-American University, of course, but more importantly, our panel is here from the Institute of International Relations. So we really want to thank them for taking the time and coming this afternoon. So today, as I'm sure you all know, we are here to talk about the Istanbul Convention, which is a convention that is preventing violence against women and domestic violence. Now, it was ratified by 34 European countries already, but not the Czech Republic, and nor has it been ratified by Russia, Hungary, Slovakia, or Bulgaria. This is concerning to us because we see this as a repercussion of rising populism in Central Europe. So I won't explain any more because you're going to hear from our experts. So I will turn it over to them in just a minute, but I also wanted to welcome you all to our mentorship and networking reception that we have immediately following. So I'll talk a little bit more about that after the discussion today. So without further ado, Veronica Vilkova will introduce her panel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the co-organizer of this event, the Institute of International Relations. My name is Veronika Vilkova. I'm the head of the Center of International Law of the IAR, and today I will be just the moderator of this event, so I will have all the nasty tasks of checking the time and cutting in when people speak for too long and playing the devil advocate if there is no devil advocate in the room. Should I use it?
Try.
No, I think it's still in the eco, no?
No, it's okay.
Is it okay? Let me now introduce the speakers of this panel. We are very pleased and happy to have 4 excellent speakers who actually do not need any introduction. And there is also the profile of each of them provided in the material, but I still think it's decent to say a couple of words to each of them. I will proceed in the order in which they will speak, so it will be a bit jumping from one side of the table to the other one. We will start with Susanna Fredeghi, who obviously is here as at her own institution because she's a lecturer at the Anglo-American University. She used to work for the European Commission for the Slovak government, and she's an expert in human rights, in gender issues, and in many other things. So that's the first speaker. The second one, and now I jump to the other end of the table, is Dr. Barbara Halakova, who has come from quite far away because she is, well, that's a bit complicated because she's normally based in Oxford. She's the Shaw Foundation Fellow at Lincoln College of the University of Oxford, but at the moment she's based in Frankfurt, which is still rather far away. She's an expert in gender issues, feminist jurisprudence, anti-discrimination, constitutional law, EU law, law in post-socialist transitions, and I could continue with them. There will be no lecture because I will just enumerate the other areas of specialization. And just to mention one book she's published 2 years ago, if I count correctly, with Hart and Bloomsbury. It's a book on gender equality in law, uncovering the legacies of Czech state socialism. So obviously, a topic which is not only of relevance for this debate, but also which is of general interest for us living here in the Czech Republic or staying here in the Czech Republic. The third speaker, Mr. Jan Podniesił, here. He's the only one representing the state administration, if I may put it like that. He's a high ministerial council of the Ministry of Interior, but he's also part of the academics. There was some mitigating circumstances. He works for the Center for Public Administration in Prague. I have here that he specializes in domestic violence, but I guess it means in the topic of domestic violence, not in domestic violence itself. And he also focuses on administrative offences law and other issues Okay. And last but not least, we have Dr. Daniel Barton there, who is an attorney here in Prague and also a lecturer, not at the Faculty of Law, but some surprise at the Evangelical Theological Faculty of Charles University, though probably again it's not so surprising, provided that the church has played an interesting role in the debate that we will discuss today. He focuses especially on the issues having to do with religious freedom, veiling, church persecution, and all these issues. So this is our panel, our speakers. Each of them will take the floor for 10 minutes, and then we will have a general discussion. But that's not the end of the presentations, because these people are here visible with all of you. But then there are other experts hidden among you, and I have just some names, so I apologize in advance if I do not indicate everyone, because some are hidden even more in the sense that I don't have them on my list. So those I have on my list are Mr. Radan Šapatý from the Office of the Office of the Czech government, who focuses on with the head of the department for gender equality. I have it in Czech here, so I need to translate it sometimes to these items are very complicated. Then the second on my list is Mrs. Kateřina Šalova from Amnesty International, the head of the Center for International Affairs. The third one on my list, Mrs. Bronislava Maranova from Information Office, Rosa, and last but not least again, definitely not, neither last nor least, is Hanna Štelcová from the Czech Women Lobby. And obviously there are many more people who will introduce themselves and they will take the floor and either make comments or ask questions. With this, my role is kind of over, so I will now head over to the first speaker, the home speaker representing the host institution, Mrs. Susanna Fay. Is it okay to start? Can you hear us with this mic? Is it not echoing too much? Oh, good. We will use it.
Okay, so I'm starting, and I have a very uneasy task because in 10 minutes I should explain the basis of what the Istanbul Treaty is about, and also at the same time what the position of the Czech Republic is in this field. So in 10 minutes this is almost undoable, but I'll try. Obviously, I'm not going to touch all the problems and all the facts, but then the other speakers will continue. So, we start with the statement that violence is a problem. It is a problem in the world, in the region, in Europe, as well as in the Czech Republic. All the researchers point out that basically 30%, over 30% of women in the Czech Republic, also in Europe and worldwide, face physical or sexual violation. Almost half of them face sexual harassment, and what is really bad is that 70% of victims never report the crimes. If it comes to the rape, it's even more. As far as we know from the research, only 10% of victims of rape have courage to actually denounce it. So why is this happening? Right? Why it's not being reported and solved? Well, first of all, there is a lack of information. There is a general mistrust in police and judicial system, and of course, just human factor of fear and shame very often. In many countries, including the Czech Republic or any other European countries, we have a shortage of call lines which would function 24 hours, 7 days. Asylum centers, very important legal, financial, and psychology counseling. And also the medical and police staff is not necessarily well trained in those matters. So there is apparently a problem, and the Istanbul Convention is offering a solution. It is a convention ratified by now by 34 states, as we heard. It was not ratified by Russia, and notably by Central and Eastern European states, including the Czech Republic. even the EU plans to ratify it. What is the aim? Well, first of all, is prevention. Prevention is the biggest task and aim of this treaty. Protection of the victims and the prosecution of offenders. Who is going to monitor it? Well, there is a special independent group of experts from state parties, which I have to say only give recommendations. So there is no sanction mechanism. There is one type of paranoia going on in the Czech Republic saying that, there will be some forces from other countries and international organizations invading us with sanctions. It's not true. It's all based on voluntary cooperation and exchange mostly of best practices. Here, just visually, you can see that the states which did not ratify really come mostly from Eastern and Central Europe. Ireland has ratified just at the beginning of this month. So it is with the UK, which I think has different troubles now. But it just shows that we are on the board really just concentrated on the East and Center. The main articles, which will be more clarified by Barbara in a second, but I just want to point out that there is a construction of gender. Gender is literally or it's specifically mentioned in the treaty as socially constructed roles appropriate for men and women. Also, there is a term of the term of gender-based violence, which means that it's violence directed against women because they are women or that they affect women disproportionately. What the states have to do to fight violence? Well, they have to criminalize all acts, including stalking, all kinds of psychological, physical, sexual violence, forced abortion and sterilization, genital mutilation, marriage, forced marriage, and honor crimes. How am I doing? Hopefully it's still on time. Now, what is the position of the Czech Republic? It is very important to mention that the Czech Republic participates actively in this field since the 90s. This is not a new field. We have our representatives in the Council of Europe who basically work in this field on our behalf. We also participated as a state in the preparation of the convention text. And we also signed the treaty itself. At the beginning of last year, the Prime Minister agreed with, officially or unofficially, in few statements, he agreed with ratification. Nevertheless, it was followed by a strong opposition, especially of bishops and other conservative politicians. And what the outcome is that at the end of the 2018, at the beginning of this year, the Prime Minister already hesitates. And there is a notion or the argument is that the Czech Republic legislation is sufficient. Now, very briefly, what actually the opponents mind, what they don't like. Well, most of them say that the whole treaty, for some reason, which will be also dealt by later, is a danger to traditional family, and it promotes so-called gender ideology. Especially the Czech and Moravian bishops basically stated that the roles, the perspective of gender roles is incompatible with natural law and challenges basic social order, which is, it might be quite destabilizing for many in our society to hear anything like that. Other politicians would state very strong statements like that whoever supports ratification agrees with genocide of its own nation. And very interesting proposition comes also from the chairman of Christian Democrats, who proposed that actually women should look for a better husband if they have a problem. It's a quite, I'd say, very easy solution. And probably the biggest reaction was awakened by this a person who is a Baptist priest and ex-minister of education. And in his sermon in the cathedral by the castle, he basically said that the convention was inspired by Marxism and Nazism, and in the words then which followed said that your families will be torn apart, your kids will be taken away, false accusation will be enough to do it. You will be deported to the labor camps of an extermination characters, and homosexual will be declared superior class. I actually have to say that because it's a very strong statement, and definitely it has an influence, and it's been published widely everywhere. So I think it's very important to really mention what kind of discourse, public discourse we have here in 2018. Nevertheless, we have to say that he is not representative of all the priests and religious persons, because immediately or almost immediately after, another well-known theologian and priest actually said that it was scandalous, that the sermon was scandalous and indeed a public offense, and it could not be passed silently. So there is this public dispute, and I just wanted to give you a feeling how it is being done, what kind of discourse we have here. Proponents, mostly NGOs which work within the liberal politician, say that the critics is misinterpreted the convention, and that the convention actually offers the approach to the problem, unified approach to the problem, and improves prevention. This is actually from the media. I took that from the internet, and it really explains or shows you how the opponents and proponents see differently, even visually, the problems. As a matter of fact, there are many myths around the whole Istanbul Treaty. What is not true is there is no regulation of family, and neither any promotion of particular type of family. It protects not only women but also men and children. It does not deny biological differences, but it fights against violence based on social stereotypes. As far as education, it promotes equality and non-discrimination, and perpetrators can be defended as before. No new rights are added to social services, neither to LGBT group. And it doesn't check asylum law. It doesn't mean then that we will have influx of migrant women. So there is two scenarios to choose in my view. Well, one is that we either listen to hypothetical and unfounded future scenarios, which never took place in any of 34 states. In this scenario will be very likely, or for sure, worsening international cooperation. There will be a stagnation in the field, depending on each and every government, and very likely we'll be isolating ourselves in the way Hungary and Britain did, which I hope nobody really was. On the other side, there is a real need to address violence, which affects 1/3 of women. So those are statistics, not hypothetical scenarios. Improvements are evident in all the states ratified, and of course, as a small state with not very happy past of violating human rights, we want to be part of the international system. And we should be wanting to exchange the best practices and improve our system based on international cooperation and peer pressure. So, if I conclude, the topic is relevant, violence and shortcomings exist, it's externally acceptable, all the major organizations regulate violence, even the EU plans to ratify the convention, and Czech Republic participates in all that work. So even though there is not a complete consensus in the debate, from my point of view, definitely duty to protect women against violence prevails by far over unfounded future negative consequences, which never proved to happen anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, for this very clear and useful introduction, not only to the Istanbul Convention itself, but also to the Czech Republic for the Istanbul Convention. And we now turn for the second presentation.
By way of introduction.
It's better without a microphone.
All together. I can speak quite loud and clearly.
Yeah, I think it will be better.
Okay. This. Hello. Hello. I think there's still quite an echo. Is there an echo?
Yeah,
I think I can shout the room down, right?
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, by way of introduction, I would like to highlight a few statements or perceptions or experiences that I think are quite typical in Czechia. We might have all heard it, the defense of a man accused of sexual violence, where people say that it couldn't, I don't think it's, oh no, but if everybody can hear me, I think we're fine, right? I think it's better just without the microphone. Okay. By way of introduction, no, I'm joking. So when somebody is accused of sexual assault or abuse, very often you hear this could not have happened because the woman is ugly, she's unattractive, or she's old. Or, as was the case, I remember, when 47 young, well, by then women, accused choir conductor a couple of years ago in Czechia of sexually abusing him while they were children, he said they were not very good singers, right? So it's this downplaying of, basically saying I can't find this person attractive. Another perception that you often find, even in scholarly literature in the Czech Republic, is that sexual violence is limited to a few deviants, so psychologically classifiable individuals who are sadists or something. Or perhaps a more public perception that this is what happens to alcoholics or people who abuse substances, but not to the normal man and woman. Often, domestic violence gets reduced to a domestic, right? This is an argument, it's a fight between partners of equal standing, of equal power, and it just happens. Some households are Italian households, as we say in Czech, politically correct. And many in the audience, especially women among us, I think, would have experienced that situation where you walk on the street and somebody wolf whistles you, makes a comment about you, about your figure. I'll say this out loud because I was just staggered by this. A colleague of mine recently posted on Facebook that she was walking through the streets of Brno, and somebody right next to her looked at her and said, "Dry pussy." And she was just like, that's a new one. I haven't heard that before. But it does happen, and it happens a lot to women, right? And what's interesting is that when you don't flirtatiously accept it, but you reject it, it often escalates, right? You get further abuse, stronger, it can turn physical. So why did I come up with these examples that occur to me today? Because I think these things suggest something important about violence against women, and why indeed we might want to call it gender-based violence. Because violence against women of this kind is not just violence that happens to happen to women. It has an underpinning. It has a cultural and social underpinning. The gender order, the patriarchy, which is hierarchically organized, and which uses violence to maintain itself, right? Patriarchy enables this violence by disbelieving women, by creating opportunities for abuse. And it benefits from it. This violence also enables patriarchy, right? And this is something really important that the convention recognizes and works with. In the words of the convention preamble, it says, recognizing that violence against women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations between women and men, which had led to domination over and discrimination against women by men, and to the prevention of the full advancement of women. And as I will say towards the end of my presentation, I think this is particularly why this bothers a lot of people in Czechia, because it acknowledges the structural nature, the deeper nature of violence against women. So I said, just to elaborate on this sort of circle of patriarchy enables violence and violence enables patriarchy. So patriarchy enables this kind of violence because it creates different kinds of pockets of silence, because it has mechanism for silencing, suppressing victims from speaking. Obviously, historically, this was legally enshrined. We still have chastisement of a wife until the 20th century in this country. A husband could beat their wife legitimately, legally. In many countries, marital rape was only criminalized a couple of years or decades ago, including the UK. But I mean, to go back to the chastisement, but you still have phrases in the language or in the popular consciousness like, you have no control over your wife and things like that, which seems suggestive of, if not legalization, then legitimation of behaviors like that. The second side of it, that the violence contributes to the maintenance of patriarchy, this is where the wolf whistle turns aggressive, right? If you reject that wolf whistle on the street, you are basically telling that man, you don't have the right to judge me by appearance. I don't care for it. Don't do it. And this rejection takes away an important power that men have under patriarchy, which is to externally judge women by their appearances, i.e. not by the content of their character, by their internal qualities, but by their beauty, by their sexuality. And if you tell them, I don't want this from you, that's very threatening to what they imagine themselves as being men under patriarchy. Again, in the words of the convention, recognizing the structural nature of violence against women as gender-based violence, and that violence against women is one of the crucial social mechanisms by which women are forced into a subordinate position compared with men. I've spoken about women, but as it has already been mentioned, the convention does more than that. It extends the protectorate. It extends the protection to people who are similarly vulnerable to gender-based violence. And because, I should also clarify, because it also speaks about domestic violence, it covers a wide range of situations, including violence against seniors, etc. But I'll focus on the gender-based aspect of it. So it targets all these situations when violence is perpetrated because somebody needs to be kept in line. When a man performing in a feminine way is being kept in line by being beaten up or even sexually assaulted. When a trans person, I mean, as you know, and we have statistics on this, that certain groups in society, especially those who are gender not performing in standard gendered ways, are targets specifically of increased levels of violence. So this is what the convention offers. Right. So the important thing that is often missing from the Czech discourse is that sexual violence is not about sex, and domestic violence is not about just a little spat. Both are about maintaining power, maintaining control, maintaining the right to make certain types of decisions, etc. And it should perhaps be said that, of course, violence is at the extreme end of a spectrum, right? But that spectrum goes far and starts with things like fashion police, or ranking women in parliament by appearance, or derogatory speech, etc., etc. But it is part of that, and it's obviously a very effective part of that, because it's so dramatic. So why is gender threatening to the Czech discourse? I think if violence against women was just violence which happens to happen to women, they participate in a bar fight or something, or even if it was just violence that happens randomly or individually, or only deviants do it, you can downplay it. You can just say, well, these are a few bad apples, or it's like other kind of violence, just some people are crazy, some people are drunk. But what the gender analysis shows us is that there is a deeper structural underpinning, and the Istanbul Convention wants to fight that structure. And that is
very, very threatening to the establishment, to the patriarchal establishment in our society. I don't know how you're doing time-wise.
2-3 minutes.
2-3 minutes, okay. So I'll just make very brief comments on 2 attacks that I've heard in the discussion. There are many more, and we can return to them in the discussion after the presentations. One is that the Istanbul Convention creates a class war between women and men. Well, I find this interesting, and I often hear this in other contexts, is that when you mention that there is inequality, people accuse you of almost like creating it, right? But, I mean, you can only say that if you actually fundamentally disbelieve that there is any gender inequality. But I do actually think this is one of the features of the Czech discourse, is that it's not widely accepted here that such a thing as gender inequality, power imbalance, obstacles to women's flourishing and to their advancement, that they exist. So there is quite a deep denial, actually, of the problem, right? So that's something that we do need to address and prove through statistics and data and qualitative studies still to our, to the public, to our society. The other one, which I find interesting, is that it's often said that gender is an ideology. Gender ideology is a favorite phrase of the church, sadly. Again, you can only say that if you don't realize that the current system is also ideology. I mean, by any definition of ideology, if one is, then the other certainly is as well. So what we live in is just a different kind of ideology. So, okay, by all means, let's have a debate then in what system of ideas are we going to live that benefits most people and is least harmful. But let's not call just one side of the debate ideology, because both are. So this shows, when you call gender ideologies, this shows a complete lack of awareness or reflectiveness on the topic of, life is not objective, law is not objective, social science is not objective. So I think, again, it shows a deeper problem in Czech society and in Czech academia as well, which is that there is a paradigmatic shift is missing of sort of self-critical, self-awareness and a critical awareness that whatever we think now already requires critical approach or critical analysis, not just whatever somebody else proposes when they want to change it. So I'll stop here. I have some thoughts about why this is a post-socialist problem, but I'll leave that for the discussion. If anybody's interested, we can comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for drawing our attention to what you describe as the structural underpinnings of not only domestic violence and violence itself, but also of the rejection of the Istanbul Convention in some countries within Europe, including the Czech Republic. So we now turn to the male part of the panel. As you can see, there is an excellent gender balance, which is only spoiled by myself. As I described, I'm here just as a moderator, so I can count. Now it's Mr. Jankovic.
Thank you. It will be very difficult to continue after Barbara, but I hope first you will understand my English, and second I will tell you some interesting information about the state of things in Czech Republic. In Czech Republic, in many cases, I think it's still a problem to explain why it is a real problem, why we should deal with the domestic violence or violence against women, why we should spend our time with such problems. For my colleagues, I tell, imagine being in a pub and you are attacked with some drunken boy. For second time, you can avoid this pub, you recover of the attack within 1 week, and you can choose next time where to go else, and it remains just a bad experience. When you are at home, and you don't know the time when you will be attacked, or you know you'll be attacked today, next week, etc. You cannot avoid bullying from somebody living together with you in the joint household. It would be very grave. And I think that explains the difference between the gravity of domestic violence in comparison with any other criminal deed. It's continuous, it harms you for a long time, it can harm you in the future as well, it can harm your children. We were talking about violence against women. Barbara explained very well what we can mean with this concept. It's second phase of our topic here. You can hide yourself at home when you're alone, but it can be very difficult to face some attacks every day, in the morning, in the evening, in your job, with your colleagues, in the pub, etc. Just because the society thinks it's just normal, it's legitimate, it's your role, it's your responsibility. And the third point of view, maybe then, Barbara was talking about some quotes of Czech politicians or Czech bishops. Also, huge amount of Czech citizens or part of the society thinks also it's some nonsense invented by Western feminists and neo-Marxists, etc. It's not my business. I wasn't so foolish to choose some idiot or drunkard. So it's something suspicious, and I don't want to have anything coming with it. But I think it's a fault. You can be victim of some of such violence anywhere, anytime, no matter whether you are rich or poor, etc. And I think also the conspirative part of the society presents this topic as something foreign, something evil, something suspicious, and that could endanger our values, our way of life, etc., etc. They are very loud, but I don't think the politicians should follow their opinion. They should follow the real interests of their citizens and of the victims. It was maybe bigger or larger interests. We made some important steps in the past. In 2004, a concrete criminal act, abuse of a person living in common household, was passed by our parliament after lots of activities of the NGO sphere, and also thanks to some pressure from foreign institutions. A complex act on protection against domestic violence was adopted. Then 2010, stalking was declared or made punishable in new penal code. But I think now we experience some decline again. The experts and the legislators say everything is done already, we don't have to improve anything, we don't have any problems, we don't need any Istanbul Convention, and mainly we don't need any so-called gender ideology, etc. And it's maybe now a victim of populism. But my question, sorry, I will make it. I made a mistake. My question is whether all the legislation really work and whether is it enough. You can have lots of tools, but if you don't know how to use them, it's useless. I think there remain lots of problems in practical enforceability of the law. If you become a victim of a domestic violence and you leave your joint household, first, you don't have money. Second, you don't have any housing or flat where you could live, etc., etc. It remains to be a big problem. It's only one of many others. So I think, I think maybe we have good legislation. We made some progress, but in the Istanbul Convention there are many other aims that we don't still reach, and which are very important for the victims. You can, if you go to the police or to the state prosecutor or to the court, any moment in this process, in any moment, everything can fail. When you don't meet a judge or a policeman who is qualified and skilled, he or she cannot help you, even though we have such a good legislation. I think for me it's one of the biggest problems now. Second problem may be the lack of shelters, lack of legal aid, and lack of willingness of the courts and of the state authorities to protect the victims, not to be worried from the violent persons, etc., etc. So I think if we adopt the Istanbul Convention, there is much of work to do more, and I don't agree it's useless or needless, or it's some Trojan horse exporting or importing gender ideology into our society or legal systems. For lots of people, it's provocative, but I'm not some gender ideologist as well, but I can see in my practice, in my job of a lawyer, helping also victims of domestic violence and other violence, or I have experience of a municipal official prosecuting the administrative offenses, including injuries and domestic violence. So I can see that the perpetrators consider to be legitimate to bite or to beat their wife because she's his property, or she should obey. She is his wife. So what we are discussing about, or it's she didn't fulfill her duties, so it's legitimate to punish her. And there are lots of stereotypes in everyday life and also in the cases of domestic violence, which make some background of these hostile activities. Or on the other hand, there are cases which you cannot explain by the gender stereotypes, but it doesn't mean that we should not be aware of these cliches, stereotypes, etc. So I think it's important. I think you cannot be such a modern man or woman not to live in some prejudice or stereotypes and etc. But I think at least we should be aware of them, and we should not hurt other people who are we in contact with. So it's very sad for me, also being a Roman Catholic, that our bishops have such conservative attitudes. When I read some official statements of the Slovak or Czech Catholic Church, it was complete misunderstanding, fight instruments, some conspirative concepts and ideas. So I'm very disappointed with it. But on the other hand, I meet lots of other young and educated people, or even older people who understand it, or who try to cope with the new, modern, dangerous world, who endangers their simple, old world where they lived in the past years. So maybe it will be everything from me, and I thank you for your patience and understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for giving us this overview of the Czech legislation and also reminding us of the fact that having something in the legislation does not necessarily mean having it in practice. It's interesting because people know it in general, that law and facts, or law and life are not necessarily identical, but they seem to make an exception for the questions of equality and violence, etc.
We have the microphone again.
I would prefer to speak without microphone.
Audience back there, what do you prefer?
Can you hear me over there? No, we can. Thank you.
Chris, is it okay? You're all the way back there.
Perfect.
Without the microphone as well?
Without the microphone as well. I think I could pick up where Jan has ended, because I was asked to present something about the position of Czech churches on the Istanbul Convention, or more broadly about the perspective of religious people or Christians in the Czech Republic on these issues. It is obviously quite a difficult and challenging task, because there are many perspectives present, but I think that we can identify some of those perspectives, and as Jan has mentioned, some of the bishops and some of the representatives of other churches made statements about how bad the Istanbul Convention is for everybody, and how bad it is for the Czech society, for the traditions of the Czech society, and for the natural order of things, and for the traditional concept of family, because it tends to destroy everything. This is something that the Roman Catholic Church, or at least some of the hierarchs, have subscribed to, and they were joined by a few other churches in this respect. Then there were some churches that issued more moderate statements, like the Evangelical Church of Czech Brethren, one of the biggest Protestant churches in the Czech Republic, that said that the Istanbul Convention has some important points, and puts on the table an important agenda which should be discussed, and it shouldn't be just downplayed. And then there were obviously churches that don't want to talk about the issue, or that didn't manage to find consensus in their boards on what to think about that, or what to proclaim publicly about that, like, for example, the Old Catholic Church. So I think you can find all possible perspectives. What I find interesting is to focus on the main reasons that have led people to join any of these perspectives. And I think it's fairly simple when it comes to people or churches that decided to support the Istanbul Convention, because they said that an abuse of power and resort to violence is bad, is against the teaching of the church, and we should be actively working against it. it also is something that is very much present in the Gospels and in the life of Jesus, and therefore this is something that those churches and those people believe in. What are the arguments or main points that the opponents to the convention put on the table? That's more difficult. As I said, there are fears of losing their traditions, fears to what could happen to the traditional family as defined by a husband and a wife and many children. There are dangers supposedly to the whole order of things. They fear the concept of gender, that nobody really knows what it is about, but it's something evil. You can tell just by the name of it. Most of those people were not even able to pronounce it, but they were still trying to. You could, for example, have some Roman Catholic priests trying to read the letters from their bishops on some kind of genderist issues and homosexualist issues that they were not able to even pronounce, but yet they were still trying to form their parishes on the evils that this could bring to their lives. There's obviously, and I think they've managed to do quite a good job of linking the Istanbul Convention to all other problems or all other threats that these traditionalists see these days, and that has to do mostly with LGBTQ rights, things that could be related to unborn life or the end of the life. They also often tend to join the conspiracy theories that there is something behind the Istanbul Convention which is not said publicly. We don't know what it is, but it's something that could bring us down the slippery slope. And this could be just the first step, and we just have to be careful. And because it doesn't bring anything new to the fore, we should rather reject it. And the argument that it doesn't bring anything new, I think, is also quite good, because if you see then the reaction of the same people, the same representatives of the Roman Catholic Church in the case of sex abuse in churches, the first reaction of the Archbishop of Prague, or one of the first reactions, is that he proposed a new law. He proposed that there would be a change in the penal code that would criminalize anybody who wouldn't inform the police about a sex offense that he got to know about. So at the same time, they maintain that the law is sufficient when it comes to violence and sex violence, and they say that we should change the thing by or deal with the issues that the church has to deal with by not changing the church and the church's approach, but by changing the civil law of the Czech Republic. I think it is also important to say that and to see the link or context of the debates on violence against women and sexual violence in general, and the sex abuse cases in the church, because from what we've seen over the past few weeks, when more and more victims have gone public with their stories, many of the bishops still don't seem to understand what the victims are going through. They often reject to talk to them. They don't want to hear their stories. For example, the Archbishop of Prague said that he would talk to the victims only once they made the statement to the police, which is just something really difficult to believe. Why would he do that? Why wouldn't he, as the pastor, the president of the local church, not talk to people who seemed to be unwell and who seemed to be harmed by the people that work for him? I find it also interesting to see how aggressive the opponents to the Istanbul Convention are. You can see many cases of not only verbal but also physical violence, which brings you to the question whether we are really so good and so fine when it comes to violence in our society. So why do all these people have these kind of positions? I think that one of the core issues and one of the core problems is with their identity and with how they perceive themselves, how much of their identity is something positive, something that they can easily define, something that they can go to other people with, and how much their identity is defined in negative terms, how much it is defined as I am not like somebody else, I'm not like those genderists, homosexualists, or whatever they call them. I'm something positive. I am who I am. And I think that in this respect, if Christian churches wanted to offer something, what they could offer is exactly this positive message of identity, of who we are, and who we are when it comes to the people who are in need, who suffer. The basic Christian message of being the good neighbor, being somebody who helps the other, as the defining feature of Christian churches in the Czech Republic. So I think I could leave it in here for the discussion.
So thank you all very, very much. I think now we would like to open it up for some questions and some further discussion among the panelists. So would you like to start with questions? I just wanted to let everybody know.
Yeah, it's fine. You stand and you.
Or you can moderate and I can run that. You want to run that around? So all of you.
Three moderators.
No. I'll point, you moderate, and you run.
And you decide.
Also
Very
decide.
nice.
All right, any questions? All right.
Yeah. So we'll just let me say, I think without that it's better. So we'll collect a couple of questions. But I would like to ask you, before you ask the question on make a comment, please introduce yourself, just mentioning who you are, the institution you represent, where you come from, and then we will turn back to the panel. You can obviously direct the question, express the question to any concrete speaker, or you can just ask the question and then it will be left up to the speakers to decide who will answer. So please, first.
Good evening, everybody. I came from Ukraine. My name is Elena. I'm a sociologist and a fellow practicing scientist at here. In Ukraine, we have this similar discourse, and the Istanbul Convention was not ratified in Ukraine as well. And the impact of church is rather high, especially in the western part of Ukraine. But my question is, the Czech society is not religious much, right? So I'm wondering why the voice of the Catholic Church here is so strong. Maybe it's because it resonates with the general public moods and conservative backlash or whatever. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any more questions at this moment so that we could collect a couple of them?
Anybody else?
seem to be the case for the moment. By the way, if you, as you could see, most people, if not all people on this panel, have a rather positive attitude to the Istanbul Convention, which is not necessarily typical of the Czech Republic. If you do not share this view, do not hesitate to say. We were speaking about this hostile discussion in the Czech Republic. I can assure you it does not apply to this room. The discussion in this room will not be hostile, and we would be very happy now speaking on my own behalf, but also on behalf of the other speakers, or of the speaker, Simon. We would be very happy to address any doubts about the Istanbul Convention, because it's an international treaty, and as any international treaty, it's a result of a compromise, so it's not perfect. And let's deal with any imperfections that you or we might see in the document. So do not hesitate to share your doubts with us.
So
if there is
or doubts?
Yeah. So if not, then there is.
Well, yeah. Hello, my name is Petra Galenska, and I am a student at the Charles University at Law Faculty, and also I'm working for the Office of the Government Czech Republic at the Gender Equality Department. And I have a question for Barbara Havelkova. She mentioned that she would be willing to talk about why post-Soviet republics have problem with Istanbul Convention, because it seems that other countries which are also or much more religious than Czech Republic doesn't have this problem, especially with, for example, Ireland in this last month. So that's my question.
I go back to the first question actually. Any third question at this moment? If not, then we turn back to the panel. So you will be addressed directly, but then obviously everyone else will take the floor.
So I'll speak without the microphone again. So I think one needs to realize that in the very formative moment in the 1960s, 1970s, and onwards, when in Western societies, I mean particularly Anglo-American, Anglo-Saxon in that sense, but even Western Europe, when two things were happening, they weren't happening in Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia. One was that there was something that I already mentioned in relation to ideology. There was a paradigmatic shift in social sciences, but that I think was more widely internalized in societies, namely that whatever we're thinking, what we're living in is not some kind of neutral, inevitable, natural reality, and what we're thinking about it is not, again, a given, it's a construct. So social constructivism, basically, and that's what gender is, right? It tells us that there are things which are socially constructed about men and women, masculinity and femininity, and because they're constructed, then they can be deconstructed, they can be constructed differently, they're changeable, right? And nor are they natural or therefore immediately legitimate, right? They're subject to discussion. And that hasn't really, that kind of shift hasn't happened here. And that's really important not just for gender-based violence, but for understanding other things. The second thing is that at the same time there was a bottom-up strong feminist movement which raised awareness. And raised awareness, women spoke up, right? Raised awareness about this actually happening. That's another point that I made, that people disbelieve this actually happening. So it's a really interesting anecdote that I'll just share with you because I think it's illustrative. So I think there was a Europe-wide study on gender-based violence, and the question was set for the West and Middle East the same way. And the results from Eastern Europe came up with much lower percentages, much lower numbers. And everybody was like, that's not likely, right? It's not likely that there's going to be less gender-based violence in these countries. What it turned out to be is that women themselves did not even perceive that what was actually happening to them was gender-based violence. If you ask them, well, what happened to you? What did he do? What did you do? What did you say? What did he say? People describe rape, for example. But if you ask them, have you been raped? They would have said no. Right? So the depth of the denial of this reality is tremendous. And because we have missed this, this moment of great debate of it, and we never recovered it really, because there are always more important things to do. And on top of that, feminism and gender got really, I think, got hurt by even just certain individualities coming back from Western Hemisphere, North America. I'm thinking Schwarzenegger, for example, right, who gave really bad press to this movement. It's kind of been defanged, it's been attacked before it even materialized. And so it's been ever since, it has been very, very difficult to put this on the agenda, to make people believe it, etc. And one last point which I'll say, and that has to do also with limited data gathering, and again I have an anecdote to go with that, which is that when the domestic violence law, change of law, was being debated in the Czech Parliament around 2004, the communist MPs said, well, look what capitalism does to you, there's only violence, there never was violence against communism. Well, that's not true, we just never gathered any data about it, right? But again, the fact that that we don't really have long-standing data research on this, again, something that we are only catching up with, it's hurting the belief that it happens.
I think that the issue of, if I may talk without the mic, I can shout. The questions of how we report violence, or what we consider to be gender-based violence, still come up in the debate in here. You can see quite often arguments that we're much better in these numbers than the Western countries are, and they think that that's because of our nature, because we're just better people, and you can see how the Western world is corrupt, and that's why they have so much violence. So that's again something that supports what Barbara was just saying. And on the other point that she said, I think it's also interesting that even though we didn't have the debate on how we perceive things and how our standpoint matters, we've got many philosophers in our tradition and people that deal with these issues, but we somehow don't manage to transpose it into the public. And that's, I think, something for us in the academia to be more worried about. And lastly, if I could get to the first question, why do Czechs as non-believers still tend to listen so much to what the churches say, or what the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church says? I think that first problem is that the Czech Republic is not as much atheist as it is said, because it is more a question of people not thinking about religion and not asking themselves those questions about why are we here and what should we do. And once they start asking, they come up to some kind of belonging to the churches. I remember when I was doing a course in sociology of religion, I was assigned the task of finding 5 atheists, I think, and to do some kind of in-depth interviews with them. And it was really difficult to find these people, because once you start asking these questions, they were like, I don't believe in anything. But, well, if I start thinking about it, actually I was baptized when I was a kid, and then I went, I think, my grandma took me to church, and actually I believe in some kind of a God, but I'm not Roman Catholic. But then if you have many people like this, and even though they say that they don't identify themselves with the church, they still follow what those people say. Like last week, I received a phone call of a random guy who just wanted to tell me, after I appeared on the TV and said something, that he thinks that the main problem of the sex abuse scandals is celibacy. And he needs to tell me, even though he hasn't been to the church since 1968, and he just doesn't have anybody else to share it with. But he still is concerned about what the church is doing. So I think that it is nice to say that the Czech Republic is a non-believing country, but still the church is playing a significant role, and people tend to listen to people in high church positions.
I will try to be short, but I would disagree a little bit. I think maybe there are lots of people who believe in something, but I don't think that the church or Catholic Church has such a big respect. I think we have a long history of communism, and the communist interpretation of history, where church was the evil and enemy, and the Hussites were something like medieval communists who were fighting the church, etc. So I don't think the church has such a respect, but from time to time the archbishop or some of the representatives of the church say something that sounds nice to some section of the society, and they become popular just because they argued very well against the new Marxist working West, or etc., etc. So I don't think that our archbishop is not popular because the church institutions, but he will be very popular when he will threaten with some threat from the West or from the European Union, or from the Marxist, leftist, etc., etc. Second thing, I think that people in Czech Republic are rather conservative in general, but on the other hand, if the people were asked what they know about the Istanbul Convention, majority didn't know anything. And from the 15 or 20% of people who knew something about the convention, they supported it. I think majority of the society is ignorant, and then there you have maybe 15, maybe 25% who consume the parliament leaves or some other conspiracy media, and they are angry about such activities, but next week they will be angry because of any different reason, and they forget Istanbul Convention within 1 week or within 1 month. So I don't think that Catholic Church has such a big authority, and I don't think that there will be such animosity to this topic at all, and I think it may be only a question of perception and whose voice is louder.
I actually tend to agree with the colleague here, and I would also think that this is just a coincidence, and this is a topic where a big part of the public hears it well. You know, the Catholic Church hit the point of the family and traditional family, and that resonates with many conservative people who actually have this as a stronghold in their mind. So I think that's just a synergy. In this very respect, I also don't think that the authority of the church will be too big. It's an interesting fact that as far as the statistics, there should be about 16% should be religious in the Czech Republic, whereas there's 70% religious people in Slovakia. Yet the mentality is very similar. So as a matter of fact, it shows that it's not so much connected to how much people are religious. They are simply conservative. It comes with the history. And to a big extent, I believe the problem what we have now is a general insecurity. There is an economic depression, there is a turmoil in the EU, and the only thing that the people have been concentrated for a very long time, especially during the communism, since we did not have any career opportunities to focus on, or some traveling plans, because we could only go to Ukraine or to Poland, to pioneers camp. So the family was a stronghold. The family was something that we cared about. So I think that it's still, if you want to destabilize that, or if this somebody says, oh, this can be destabilized, it is personal for many people. That's a value for many people. That's almost maybe for many the only value. So it can be, this is something that they hear, that they listen to, especially in the setting of the Czech family or Slovak family, the man is the boss. Even by now, my own father, when we are 4 people, he says, now I'm talking. Attention, now I'm talking. It's me speaking now, quiet. That's the way he speaks. And there's no way to change that. And we are full of feminists, my family, and we're like, okay, well, just go on, there will be another generation coming. So this is the setting we have here, regardless of religion. And also there's another aspect which I find historically important and interesting and damaging, is that the Czech Republic and Slovaks have been shaping themselves, or their identity has to be fought for. We were dominated for many years in Habsburg and Austrian monarchy. Then we were subjected by Nazism. Then we were subjected by the Soviet Union. So actually, the men and women were working in cohesion for most of the historical periods. And they were facing those external enemies, and they only had each other. And it's somewhere in the mind, and it's difficult to change. And it's very easy to be manipulated because they've got used to having this external enemy. It's so easy to produce one. Politically, it's the easiest thing to produce an external enemy. And that's what the politicians, many politicians are doing for strictly just publicity, and they position the EU as external enemy, the feminists as external enemy, the gender issues as external enemy, and they don't realize what is worrying me the most is that they don't realize how dangerous it is. We are dividing our society here, and most of all, we are departing from the Western society. We are isolating ourselves in our little Central European conservative family, whatever. And to me, there is a huge danger, and I'm very scared personally of the moment that we will arrive to the point where the Hungary is now. And that's something that we absolutely should avoid. And we really need to insist as lawyers and as educated people that we have to simply ratify human rights treaties. And we have to belong to the human rights family. We've been building that for so many years. So in my mind, there's no way. I mean, what are we talking about? Are we really discussing whether or not we ratify an important human rights treaty? Well, everybody has ratified already for some invented problems.
Time for 1 or 2 last questions. I see here.
Hi, I'm Sarah from the Institute of New Generations. The topic of this event is there's this victim of populism, right? Victim of populism. And my question is, what do you think, to what extent is the convention a victim of disinformation, which is linked to populism? But disinformation also concerning disinformation by, for example, foreign actors, foreign countries, and so on. And perhaps even if you could ask the Office of the Government, if they would have some kind of data on this, I think they were still involved. Thank you.
Any other questions?
If this is not the case, then I will make use of my position. I'll ask you the last question. We have heard the diagnosis, so we know what's wrong, we know why it is wrong. We don't know how to move on from this point to go, which is the health state or that's ratification. So what should be done? More information? Will people listen to this information at all? What do you suggest? You can. Yes, so then we make
very briefly to the question on disinformation. It's actually interesting because together with our intern, who is present here and doing the reports, Daniel, we've been following, we've done some research on who actually releases the information about Istanbul Treaty, in what form and how often. And the outcome was shocking, with actually the public media, especially the Czech TV and the Czech radio. There are like dozen of releases altogether. Whereas the disinformation media, especially Parlamentní listy and many others, Parlamentní listy itself issued like 100, while the Czech television like 5 or 10. So it's enormous disbalance there, and so obviously you get much more bad publicity for the Istanbul Treaty, which has a big audience in the Czech Republic, unfortunately. So definitely there is it's a huge problem, which can be statistically proven and detected, and it is being. So I think there is definitely there should be done much more in public media to inform and Czech TV.
The last motivation, last word.
No, I may say once again what I'm thinking about now. When we were trying to pass the laws on domestic violence, maybe 15 years ago or at least 10 years ago, the only two groups who were opposing the proposals were the violators or aggressors themselves and some hardline conservatives among the Christians or believers. Now it became a toy in the hands of the disinformation and conspiracy scene, which is looking for any other dividing topic in the society, and the truth doesn't matter. These articles are not about knowledge. It's about dividing the society, making a mess in both the society and in the heads of the people and politicians. I'm very disappointed with it because even some of the politicians are scared of it. They are not brave enough to say it's nonsense. I believe it. It's useful. It's important. I will do these decisions, and even some politicians make big fun of it, and some even spread the disinformation and stupidities produced by the media. So for me, the fate of the Istanbul Convention would be for me a test of our society and political scene, whether the disinformation and populism is so powerful or not.
I agree that it is that the activity of people who would be spreading some kind of meaningful information is a problem, and in my own experience, for example, journalists tell me that it's really difficult to find somebody who would be willing to talk about the Istanbul Convention and not decry it, and who would, for example, debate a politician who just wants to make it his agenda or her agenda. So yes, the lack of information is or lack of activity of people who know something about the issues, for example, about gender issues, because gender has been abused in these debates greatly. It is a problem, but I don't think that we can limit ourselves to the information sharing, because it's not only a matter of arguments that can be presented, but it's more about kind of projects or life projects of people, something positive that they can relate to, something that may form part of their identity, well-being, security, something that they feel good about. Because I think all these debates that populists have been using or abusing have in common that people are insecure about who they are and about the world that they live in. And we need to talk to them as academics or intellectuals. And we need to help them to find out who they are in positive terms.
I'll follow up on this. So my instinct is always to say, well, we need to explain, we need to educate, we need to discuss. But, and this is not from my own head, but one of the analyses of populism at the moment is that this is not a threat to democracy, but it's actually a threat to enlightenment. Right? So it's reversing a much more fundamental turn in European history, which is the belief in the power of reason. Right? And that's what fake news and these kinds of campaign are more fundamentally threatening. That it's not that you lose in a debate, it's that you don't care about the debate having any foundation in fact and reality and fairness, etc., etc. Despite this, I still think that we cannot give ground, and we cannot give ground both in sort of using underhanded tactics and sort of accepting this tenor of debate. I don't think we should give ground on the substance of it, in the sense that I often hear, and everybody who's a feminist or talks about gender is like, why are you so aggressive? Well, first of all, I don't think I'm aggressive, but why do you go so far? Why don't you want less? Or why, and the answer is, well, because less wouldn't do it, right? Or why do you bring gender into everything? Well, because it's in everything, right? And I feel that this sometimes, and it's be strategic, I don't think that's going to work, right? If you start stepping backward, you're going to fall off at some point. You're going to be taken over. I think the only response to this is not to give ground. This will be my sort of finishing statement, right? Like you can give into this. You can give into this in terms of tactic and way of speaking and discussing, and you can give into this at the level of substantive argument.
So there is still some hope in the last comment. So let's hope that the hostage will be released at a certain point of time. We just need to see how much we need to pay for it and in what the currency. Please, we are, I know. Well, it's over for today. It's not over with the Istanbul Treaty. That's we've already heard.
We have time to continue talking. So
yeah, but after.
In
an informal setting. So we are now at the end of this event. I hope you learned something. Probably it will make you think more about some stuff. I would like to thank our excellent speakers for sharing with us their ideas, their knowledge, facts, finally documented facts about the Istanbul Treaty and the debate in the Czech Republic. So please join me in thanking them also. Organizer, the Institute of International Relations, for coming, for being with us. And now I turn over the floor to the representative of the first organizer.
Thank you again, all of you, for coming. I have a few kind of housekeeping things to transition us into the reception, so just hang with me for just a few minutes. The first thing I want to do, of course, is again, we're just thanking back and forth, but thank you all so much for bringing this discussion to everybody here and letting us at AAU host you and letting us partner with you in this conversation. It's really important to us, so thank you all for that. So. I have some gifts for you. They're small, but they are apparently fancy truffles.
Just a sec, we will just introduce the mentors.
Yes, so please hang tight with me for just a few minutes. So as I think you all know, now we are going to transition to our mentorship and networking reception, even though my Word document wants to say that mentorship is not a word, but I'm making it a word. Mentorship is a word. Because we here at AAU believe that I think the most important lessons probably occur outside of the classroom. So we're trying to teach our students wonderful things. We hope our graduates have learned wonderful things, but we feel like you learn the most from your experiences, but also from each other. So this is part of the AAU's Mentorship Hub, in which we are trying to bridge that gap and connect our students and our young graduates to our more experienced alumni and our friends of AAU here in this community. This is also part of something we started about a year ago, which is our Women's Leadership Initiative. We keep searching for a better name for it, but it's Women's Leadership at this point. And this is something that we feel is really important. We want to help empower our young women, who are students and recent alumni, as they move forward into their careers. But this is not just about women. We absolutely want and encourage men to be an equal part of this conversation. So we welcome everybody to any events we host and to be part of this. This is our third talk. We've had two last in the fall, and Susanna Falegi has been the star of all three of them now, so thank you for that. And now we want to start moving forward with having actual receptions so you can get to know each other and connect. So this is the first, and we hope to have another one in April. We invite you all back for that. So without further ado, we have a lot of fantastic mentors here tonight. So I'm going to introduce them each briefly so you all know who they are and kind of what they look like. Everybody's going to wear a little name tag like this. So I'm going to ask all of our mentors to find Elizabeth. While I have Elizabeth, I want to thank her. She doesn't take credit, but she is our absolute hero behind the scenes. Like, all of these events would be impossible without Elizabeth Novacek. And what she puts into our students and our alumni is absolutely incredible. So stand up, and I want to give her a round of applause. All right. So our mentors, I think quite a few of them are here, and some are still coming. So they're not all here, but they will be. So I'm going to read your name. If you will stand up and wave to everybody, that would be great. First, Daniel Martin. And I apologize in advance if I mispronounce names. I'm going to try really hard, but please do accept my apology if I mispronounce. Simone Bertolone. Okay. Veronica Bokova.
I enjoyed it.
Katarzyna Brussikova-Jacques.
Good evening, hello.
Actually, I'm going to give you a brief description so you all know kind of who everybody is too. So you know Daniel, you know Veronica. Katarzyna is the executive director of Sněmovny 7. She's a former member of the Czech Parliament, the chair of the EU committee. She's the founder member of the Czech Support Tibet, and many more things, I think. Tomáš Ruth-Jochowski. So he is with the Czech Pirate Party, if I'm not mistaken. Maria Maggie Dukupilova. Thank you. All right. As you know, Maggie is a Czech government officer with the European Green Party Secretary General candidates, I believe. So, thank you. Susanna Falegi, I think you know. Diana Hanekova. Who is a business architect, performance and business coach, and a facilitator with Style and App. Ava Howling, so I think just came in. I saw there's Ava Howling. CZ with her husband, and also her own business, Learn.cz. And here in just a minute, whenever I actually let you all go to mingle with wine and food and great conversation, Ava's going to kick us off with a really good keynote speech for the evening. So, all right. Sonia Krasova.
She's not here.
Not here. All right. Branislava Marvanova. Yes. Information and Counseling at ROSA and Stop Nasili, and a board member of Women Against Violence in Europe. Then Jan Potniel, I think I mispronounced that. Janan Shafaji. It's getting better after. He's with the Office of the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, Czech Republic.
That's from Lincoln. You have the old information there. Update.
What is the updated correct pronunciation?
We are from the Office of the Czech government, but it doesn't matter.
Now you all know. All right, and the last but not least, Katarzyna Shalkova. She's the head of advocacy at Amnesty International Czech Republic and the Gender and Science Department at the Institute of Sociology at the Czech Academy of Sciences. So now you know that you've got a wonderful group of mentors here who are ready to talk with everybody, have a great conversation, and hopefully we'll inspire each other a little bit after this talk. I think we need inspiration now after this talk. So again, without further ado, we have wine, food, and everything else. So thank you all.